It says Link City on it.
Yeah, yep.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nidhi Baiswar. I work as Head of Sustainable Design and Construction for a company called Bouygues UK. Now on the screen, you can see the logo of Link City and Bouygues Construction. So we are all the same company, really. And I'm going to talk a bit give you a bit of background of who we are, give you a little bit of introduction about, what sustainable development really means, what I'm here to talk about, and then give you an introduction about some regulations that we've got to meet in relation to sustainable development, and then talk about how, as a company, we are mitigating those challenges and those coming up with options or design criteria to satisfy those regulatory requirements. So we are a global company. If you've not heard of us, we operate in 60 countries, and the pronunciation of that word there is Bouygues. It is a bit difficult, and it's a French company, so not everybody can pronounce it correctly. It's Bouygues Construction. So we are based in 60 different countries, like I said, and we carry out our functions in various different sectors. So as you can see at the bottom of the screen, we look at land management, urban planning, and we look at how we can develop a land in terms of finances, and also look at what we can effectively build on a particular land. We have teams that design the developments and construct it. And later on, after we've constructed, we also have a team who maintain it and look after the building users. And at the end of the life cycle of the building, we also go back to deconstruct and then look after the project after it's deconstructed in that sense. So you would see a different range of brands that operate in the UK, and they're all under Bouygues Construction umbrella. So the part that I will be talking towards the end of my presentation, I have one slide talking about how we worked with the University of Essex, and Link City is our developer arm who was closely involved with that sort of development. Now, I work with Link City. So what Link City would do is find an opportunity to develop and build, and then identify the best use for it and construct. And part of the offer would be constructing it and maintaining it. So Link City is a developer arm. We would look after the building for, as the contract says, but we look after the life cycle of the project in that sense. Now, within Link City, the developer arm, we've got our student accommodation brand, which is called ULiving. And then again, what we do is we work with universities in partnership with universities to build student accommodation projects. It's as simple as that. Now, there are two developments within the campus at University of Essex. One is called the Meadows and the other one called the Cots. Both of them were developed by ULiving and built by Bouygues Construction, and being maintained through the same type of contract as you can see on the screen. So I'll touch that towards the end of the project of the presentation. To start off with, that was the background about us, what we do. My role in the company sits within the technical department. So what I do is, with my team, look after driving sustainability on our projects and on our company processes. So you saw the different logos. So my remit is looking or driving sustainability on those different companies with their logos, as you saw, and also work on individual projects driving sustainability in terms of setting a vision and a strategy and making sure it's delivered till the end until we hand over the project. So now I'm going to start off with the basics of what a sustainable development really means. Now, on the screen you see is the dictionary extract, which says sustainable, what it means is something that is able to be maintained without exploiting natural resources. And a sustainable development is a development that looks after or is a development that maintains within acceptable levels of global resources depletion and environmental pollution. So that's typically what a sustainable development or sustainable word really means. Now, what it means to us as a company, we follow this definition, which was brought by the Brundtland Commission in 1987. A sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So that's where, when we are designing a development, we think about not just what we are providing the development now, but also have a foresight about what's going to come in the future, the different trends, the different building users who would be using the building. What if the need of that particular building, if it is today designed to be a student accommodation, doesn't need to be a student accommodation after 20 years. So when we are looking at developments, we look at these future trends, also the users that will change, and with them will be change of requirements. How do we embed everything and produce something that is sustainable within the limited resources that we have available? So that's the agenda that we follow when it comes to sustainable development. Now, something that you may be aware of, this is Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, as you can see. Now, back in 2015, about 193 countries came together in a UN General Assembly, and they adopted these goals, Sustainable Development Goals. The idea is that by 2030, we should be able to meet all these goals that are set by the UN. And Bouygues Construction is a signatory of this UN Global Compact principles. So what this means is that all these goals are embedded in our policies, in the way we work, in the processes that we have, so that we are able to meet the requirements of those goals and meet those targets that are set there. So when it was launched, the Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015. This is our policy that came out soon after that in 2016, which is called Responsible and Committed. So we had a sustainability policy that existed before. With the UN goals, we obviously changed it to suit those targets and goals and came up with this policy, which now looks at 12 commitments, and as our business covers the remit of a project, of a building, right from conception stage towards till the end, and even after the building is deconstructed, we formulated 12 solid commitments that we have got to deliver when it comes to our projects. So this policy sits on as a base for all the work that we do within the company. So that's giving you a background of how our company adopted those goals and set something which we now apply on every project going forwards. Then now going forward, what I'm going to talk in the presentation is give you an overview of the regulations and standards that apply globally. Of course, we've seen with the UN goals, but now focusing more on the UK side of things. As you may know or may not know, there were some acts and regulations that existed in the past that asked every industry in the UK to reduce their global greenhouse gas emissions. So that came from a Climate Change Act in 2008. And then later on in 2015 with the Paris Agreement, obviously there were stricter goals set for us. Recent years, you've seen a lot of activity in the media with Greta Thunberg, with David Attenborough, everyone talking about how there is a big need for us to now reduce our emissions and make our planet survive with what we've got. And following that, 2019 in June, UK came up with a net zero carbon strategy. So not a strategy, actually, that was a law. So the law was passed in June 2019 that by 2050, the UK economy will be net zero. What this means is that every business in the UK has to put in efforts to make sure that they target the net zero for 2050. So that's a big, big target, especially for companies like construction or automobile, or it is a big target for us to achieve, because a lot of our activities contribute towards global emissions, carbon emissions. And currently, as it stands, there are fewer resources available for us to go down to net zero. Having said that, Bouygues Construction, we've taken already made a lot of changes to the way we work, and now are putting in a lot of effort, resources, investment as well, to make sure we reach those targets before 2050 as well. just in the beginning of March. Now, what happened was London declared climate emergency sometime back, but in the beginning of March this year, they released a strategy of how buildings should be built in London. So this is the first city or authority, local authority in the UK to impose a regulation which says any new building that is built in London will now have to meet zero carbon targets. And it starts from now, from March 2nd precisely. So what we're saying here is any development that we are building has to be zero carbon. Also, it needs to follow, if you see the word highlighted in bold, it's called circular economy. So what it says is that we need to apply circular economy principles, which means that we've got limited resources on the planet. We need to make sure that we keep those resources in the loop and make sure that the materials that we use are well informed and they are not wasted towards the end of the project when it's demolished and things like that. So I'll go into a bit more detail later on in my slides, but this is just to let you know there are things changing and they're changing dramatically. And what this only implies that once London has set something, the other cities, other local authorities, other boroughs and councils, I'm already aware of them, are making these changes in line with what London has set. So very soon, all of UK will have something which is similar to what London has got. Now, there are some councils or boroughs in London who now have got carbon tax, and they've identified the value of the carbon tax as well, which now new buildings will have to pay if they are emitting carbon. So this is when we are constructing the developments, we have to design a building which is zero carbon. And if it doesn't meet zero carbon, if it is emitting some carbon, then as a developer or a contractor, we would be liable to pay some tax on the emissions that the buildings would emit. So it's a big liability, and we have to consider that if you see the number of years, we have to pay tax for 30 years upfront, sometimes even before we start the work on our sites. So it is a big, big commitment to ensure that what we are building is zero carbon at the end. Now, those were all the regulatory requirements, or the main ones. I haven't covered everything because I can go on and on. There are lots and lots of regulations that apply to our construction industry. But those were the big main ones that apply. In the next part of my presentation, I'll talk about the different challenges that we face. Now, there's something that obviously everyone knows about climate change. This was an extract from 2018, if I remember. The temperatures had reached really, well, 30, 33 degrees, as you can see on the screen, but the year after it was even worse. I live in London near Greenwich, so this was my local park. And this is a picture when it came in the news. I took a screenshot to say that I had been to the park as well. I had never seen it become that parched, but that was the scene in 2018 then. And there were some tweets which really were quite interesting to see that with the change in climate, how our nature was responding to as well. So we all know that things have been changing in terms of climate. There are different things we now need to be aware of, and all of this affects what we design today. So if we are designing a building which is meant to withstand the temperatures for today, we need to also consider temperatures that would change in 20 years of time or 60 years of time, and how the users in the building will be comfortable now and also in 20 and 50 years of time. So we have to look at all those scenarios, model that for our buildings, and make sure that these targets and these changes in climate and temperatures and wind speed and where is different rain, snow, all of that is accounted when we are designing our buildings. So with that, another challenge which came up last year, of course, everyone's quite aware of that, is COVID. This is not to scare you. This is a slide to just tell you that we've got COVID to deal with, and we think we've made a lot of efforts. But all the efforts that we have put in currently shows only 8% decline in the worldwide carbon emissions, which means that we have to continue this trend to be able to meet that Paris Agreement of limiting our climate in temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So overall, there's very little that we've done, and we think we've done a lot. We really need to do a lot more to deal with climate change. That slide on the screen for you is not to say that recession is to follow. It's to just tell you the extent that we can deal with COVID, we can deal with recession, but climate change is even bigger, and we need to really think forward and make sure we have systems in place to deal with these challenges. The next challenge for us is about urban biodiversity. So biodiversity, what it means is looking at green spaces, when originally where you can see this picture would have been a green land with a lot of trees and plants and birds and bees and insects. And we've suddenly encroached that and built everything mostly with concrete. So how do we build that urban biodiversity back is quite key for our construction industry. Now, on the slide, you would see that the global trend is to move from rural communities to metropolis. However, with COVID, that trend might change. We haven't got a good understanding of that yet, but this was a year before COVID happened, that the trend was people were moving to bigger cities to establish their base. And with COVID, for all you know, because people can work remotely, it would change. But that would only mean that we will now be building more in the rural areas. And what we don't want to happen is lose these green spaces that already exist in nature. The other challenge we've got is materials. Now, you'd be surprised that the construction industry uses about 60% of the materials used in the UK, raw materials. And what it really means is that we are using a lot and not contributing anything back. So the idea of using more materials, what we need to understand is there is something already existing in the supply chain, already existing in the form of our existing buildings. And how do we make best use of what already exists rather than extracting new materials from the earth? So that's another challenge that we've got to face and mitigate. And this is just to summarize everything, where we've got the world population going up, which means the consumption is going higher and higher. And we've got our natural resources, which are going down because of the consumption that is going up. So it's an unsustainable growth, and we need to find a stop to that and bring it to equilibrium where we are limiting our resources, use of resources, and using what's available on our planet and not relying on other ways. Now, to come to the next part of the presentation, I'll quickly whiz through the slides talking about how we've mitigated all these challenges and the regulatory standards that we've got to comply with. We've got in the UK certain sustainability certification schemes. You may or may not have heard about it, but there's something called BREEAM, there's something called Passive House, Home Quality Mark, there's Living Building Challenge, there's a Well Building Standard. So all of these touch on aspects of sustainability. So us as a company, what we have decided to do is to apply these standards and certification schemes to every project as much as possible on our developments that we build and construct. Now, these schemes that you saw touch on almost all of these aspects. They look at energy, they look at water, materials consumption, pollution, health and well-being, waste, management, ecology, transport. So these schemes that you know, I showed you in the previous slides, if you're going through one of them, you know that there are certain requirements that you need to fulfill under these categories, as you see on the slide. And under each of these categories, you would have some KPIs that you would have to achieve. So if you're focusing on energy, it'll be how you measure your energy, how do you reduce your energy, and then how you can get that energy consumption to zero. So there would be KPIs set, and it gives you a good process to implement on your project to be able to reach those targets relating to sustainability and environment. The circular economy model now, as I was speaking about materials used in the previous slides, it's what we are asked to now deliver as part of regulations as well. As you saw in London, it's already there as a requirement. And we see that coming in from most of our clients, local authorities, universities who are targeting to be more sustainable now and looking at resources. they all want us to follow the circular economy model. What it really means is making sure that everything is in the loop when it comes to materials that we're using. Today, what we follow is a very linear economy, which is taking it out from the Earth's surface, using it, and then discarding it. Some of the items do get recycled, but not all of it. The idea is that how do we keep all the materials, all the system resources in the loop and make it more circular? Now, it is quite difficult to achieve that within the construction industry because we use materials such as concrete, we use materials such as steel, which some of it can be recycled, but some of it may not be. So we've come up with a process of how we design our buildings. So we're looking at how we first retain our buildings as they are. So if we are looking at a site and if it already has an existing building, we'll try to make best use of that existing building with refurbishment or refitting and using it to the fullest extent. And then if we had to demolish it, then how do we use the demolition waste in the new construction? So that's something that we are heavily focusing on as we are developing our future projects. The other thing we're focusing on is modern methods of construction. So starting with materials, because they are very important and they are the biggest part of our carbon emissions as well. So we look at how the materials are used. If we're putting a material inside a building, whether it's in the form of a tile or carpets or even paints, how often do they need to be replaced? Can they survive the different users that will be using the building? And when they are to be replaced, can they be refurbished or they have to be completely replaced with something brand new? So we are thinking of all those aspects to remove waste along the life cycle of the building. With technology, we are investing in looking at what's the best way to use technology and make sure what we're producing is valuable for our clients, for our building users, and the method. So how we build it as well, whether it's safe to build, is it cost effective? Again, removing waste from the way we design, think, and use technology. Some of the examples, so what we've done is as a global company, we are looking at modular construction. So looking at how we can build some rooms in factories and then put them on the site, stack them one on top of the other, where what happens is when you're building, producing some modules in a factory, you reuse the waste that is produced rather than on site. So you're using the materials more efficiently, and on site, you're more efficient, you're quicker as well when you're delivering the building. So this is just a snapshot to show that we are looking into modular construction. That's one way of trying to reduce our resources consumption. One of the other ways is looking at refurbishment, like I said, of existing buildings. So this is one of the projects we did where we retained the facade of the building and completely refurbished inside or refitted the inside of the building to change the use as well. It used to be offices before, and now we've changed it to residential flats. Also looking at recycling and remanufacturing. So things that come out or materials that come out of our demolition waste, how can we use it back into the structure of the building? Wood, how we can best recycle wood, and any furniture or loose items that come out as well. How can we look at refurbishing them and putting them back into the building? And also working with some suppliers who offer this service where we pay them a rent and they come and give us the furniture. And after every couple of weeks or a period of time, they come back to replace the furniture or mend the furniture if it needs replacing. So we are paying for the service, not for the product. And that keeps the materials in the loop. So we're looking at a lot of models relating to that sort of economy. And the next part, so we're looking at how we can use nature as the best model to design our buildings. So one example of that on the screen, as you can see, you've got cross sections of different, solid materials. So the first one is a solid cube, but in the form of a tube. So the structural strength of that elements that you see with 100% of the material is the same as that other side of things where you have a circular solid section. which uses 82% of the material. So you've saved that 28% of, or 18%, sorry, of materials, and you're getting the same strength at the end. And then the next part of it, again, you can see the hollow tube, how it uses 20% of what the first option was. However, it's giving the strength, which is the same. And also the last part where you see we've removed the materials from the top and the bottom, where we put the materials where it needs the exact strength. And it uses 14% of the materials from the previous one, previous option, that is 100%, that is, and it gives you the exact same strength. So it's, in engineering terms, materials have been removed, but it gives you the required strength for your structure if you were to design it correctly. And we're using these methods, and this gets inspired from nature, like how bamboo really works. And we're applying that for our projects as well. And then what we're really focusing on as well is putting nature back into the developments that we build. So looking at how we can improve our urban biodiversity and build communities which, well, we cater for the needs of every individual who would be using the building, whether it's a young family or a student or an old couple or a single person who lives on the development. So we are looking at future-proofing our development, how that one person who's a student can live in that development for his entire lifetime, and how the buildings can adapt to their uses, changing uses as well. Now, to conclude, this is the pictures here you may be familiar with, the two developments, the student accommodation buildings in your campus. Both of them have been built and developed, designed and built by Bouygues. I was part of the latest one, which is called the COPS. Something that we've done, again, applied those principles that I've shown you in the previous slide. We've certified these buildings for BREEAM. We've looked at material efficiency. We've looked at flood risk, adapting to climate change. We've looked at how we can improve ecology and biodiversity, energy efficiency, and a lot more. I could have put a lot more things in the slide, but just to give you a snapshot that we've changed the way we worked 10 years back, and now we are applying that on every project that we deliver. And we've been able to achieve that through our company culture, which is now called Shared Innovation. So on our company logo, you would see we've got a tagline which says Shared Innovation. So that's, I think, a big driver to reach these good stories that we've got to tell for sustainability on our projects, because we encourage our people who work within the company to come up with innovative ways of meeting these targets and regulations for sustainability, environments, and applying that on our projects as we go along. So it's that collective intelligence that helps us deliver sustainability on all of our projects. And this motto of shared innovation really is the big driver. So that's all from me. I hope you found it interesting and you've got something to learn about, but I'll be open to
a couple of questions for you, Nidhi, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Me asking, three to be precise. One of them casual, just sort of light-hearted with regards to the accommodation that I can actually see out of this window that you have helped out with. Second one, I think will help me and the audience learn. And a third one will be a challenging one, so do prepare. So first of all, the light-hearted one, you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that the way that your company functions right now, when you construct a building, it's constructed in such a way that looks forward. If the building was to change its purpose, we adapt to it and we think about what it could potentially turn into. As a side note, and as a little bit of an Easter egg, are there any plans or any possibilities for the accommodation that stands there? So for example, the COPS that the university or your company has foreseen that could be a separate option that it could evolve into, as it were?
That's a good question, firstly. Thank you for that. It's a good thought as well, because you're linking it with what you see now. So with the COPS, the idea is that students will be using the building, and we have built it for a 50-year lifespan to be a student accommodation. However, having said that, we have looked at how The structure can be adapted to, does it have tolerance to take in more load and things like that. So it has been designed for it, but for the use as such, at the moment, it is designed for the next 50 years to be a student accommodation. But having said that, it doesn't mean that it cannot be changed to a different use. It can.
Interesting, really interesting. Yeah, trying to get some inside information here. But yeah, second thing, again, I'm not a subject matter expert, but how do you measure the emissions from a building? So what sort of things you would look for in a building that has pretty high emissions or that is pretty bad? How would you measure it? What would you look for versus a building that obviously has no emissions or is neutral, etc., etc.?
Yeah, so it is done via modeling. So there are software. What we do is we model the building as we will build it. We will put in the exact materials and the properties of the materials as well. So we know how much heat transfer happens from one material to another. Then what we do is we model the systems as well that we are designing in. So all the light fittings. So these are the things that essentially emit carbon or use energy. And when you're using energy, that means you're emitting carbon. So all the lights, building services systems, so your radiators, your boilers, your any water that you use inside the building, your ventilation systems, all of this is modeled inside that building model. And then we run simulations and we understand that this is the regulated energy. So your energy for heating, cooling, hot water demand, and ventilation is your regulated energy. You can predict that this is the amount of energy one person will need. What you cannot predict is how much energy you will need to blow dry your hair or use your shaver. And we make some assumptions on those items as well. And then we model it all together to see how much of energy that will be needed for all these functions and translate that into carbon. And then we know how much carbon our buildings are emitting. To reduce that carbon to zero or that energy consumption to zero, it starts with very basic, how do we design our buildings? So we need to be careful. We have to design very airtight buildings. So once you heat the building for 2 hours, there should be no need for you to reheat it again if your building is well insulated. So that's the first step, looking at the design. The second is then looking at how efficient our systems are. And the third step is then looking at if we can create renewable energy on site that will then be sufficient to look after the energy that is needed for the building. So there's a step-by-step approach and it's all done through energy modeling softwares.
Yeah, it must be a step-by-step because that all sounds complicated. But yeah, and then the last question. So one of my friends studies finance that goes into environmentalism. Read one of the essays by that very person that talked about, and it's a bit sad really, it wasn't a very good message, but it talks about how a lot of countries who set regulations and the laws in place to reduce their carbon emissions or to be carbon neutral, a lot of them start reaching those goals or developing it to start reaching those goals. But the way that they reach it isn't really through reducing those carbon emissions. Instead, they quite literally outsource those carbon emissions to other countries, be it through manufacturing, be it through other means, and only on paper does it look like they're actually going down, where it's actually, oh, it's pushed onto another country, so as a world, we're not actually doing much better. We're just sort of pushing the problem onto the next person. So keeping that in mind, keeping the outsourcing in mind, how well would you say that UK is doing, especially within your industry? Like, how well is UK doing on that front? And do you think we can meet those deadlines that we're setting ourselves with the regulation, being fair with it as well, not just outsourcing it?
Yeah. No, that is a very good question, and that's a very good study that your friend has already done. So yes, it is important to know that those targets that are set are there for us to achieve. And for the UK, whilst we should be able to achieve it if we all put in the right efforts in the right direction. So I don't think it's impossible to achieve it. But towards the end, you will always have some industries. Well, you can think about the when you look at the airspace, or looking at the industry when it comes to travel. There will be some emissions coming out of it, and we have to find better ways. And all of this, if we are designing an aircraft that uses renewable energy, it's innovation that we need. We are not there yet. And that's why the culture of innovation has to be really enforced in every sector to be able to come up with these solutions to get to zero carbon. And that's where our company has realized that aspect, and we now have that embedded in everything that we do. So I think it is achievable. It's not that we cannot achieve, but with the right efforts and the right sort of mindset as well. And in terms of offsetting what you said, when you offset it to another country or another, that is one of the ways of how finance sees it, to look at reducing emissions. But then again, you have to understand that there may be some things that you may not be able to do much about. And then the option lies in offsetting. But having said that, once the company has got a deadline and they've reached that through offsetting, they should set them another ambitious deadline, which should be to how to get to that other status without the offset. So I think companies are thinking in that direction, especially since the last year, because this sustainability, environment, carbon agenda has taken a lot of momentum in the last few months, and companies are thinking in that direction. So I'm hoping this mentality would change, and we would hopefully come up with solutions. And in a way, we are helping the other economy to also develop. But at the same time, we should be looking at ourselves and driving it more inwardly than looking to offsets.
Yeah,
that's my take on that.
Very, very good answers. It got a bit essay, but that's my fault. But yeah, thank you for all the answers. If in the meantime any of the participants have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We can always come back to Nidhi. But in the meantime, as we have nothing coming through at the moment, we'll pass on the stage to James and his company, Presto Coffee. So please, James, take it away.
Great. If I just share, Nidhi. Sorry, Nidhi, I think you're still sharing. Sweet.
Very good answers, by the way. As I said, could write an essay about the whole thing.
Cool. So, I mean, first of all, I'm James, founder of Presto Coffee, and I think is a really good segue from Nidhi, your presentation there. Presto is at the very beginning of its journey in sustainability. It's so interesting comparing the construction sector to something like food and drink, where food and drink is so wildly unregulated. It's kind of insane to think. But so yeah, I started Presto 2 years ago. I studied at University of Essex for 3 years, graduated in 2018. And first of all, will have and always will be a coffee addict. Just runs through my veins, and yeah, that's it. And left university and kind of with this aspiration of being the next Tesla and Elon Musk entrepreneur, when in reality we all know it's blood, sweat and tears, and paying yourself an incredibly low salary. So trained as a consultant, specializing in direct to consumer brands, went from food and drink company to food and drink company, kind of learning the trade of how direct to consumer brands work, doing a lot of coffee tasting and sampling as I went along. And then after my 5th consultancy job, I kind of turned around and looked at myself and said, well, if I'm able to come in and kind of implement this process and this plan for food and drink companies to start selling online, why can't I do it for myself? So went back to the drawing board on the kind of life plan and the Elon Musk life journey, and decided to start Presto. So looked at the coffee market as a whole, and saw the amount of sustainability greenwashing that the the other competitors in our space were doing. And kind of saw this niche within beans and the wider innovation, which I'll get to in a minute, about providing a coffee that is A, good for the environment, B, ticks a certain price point for the coffee connoisseur that isn't willing to pay £30 for a kilo, and thirdly, provide a service to those customers which is completely bespoke versus going to a supermarket and picking up, you know, a bag of beans that is packet number 3000 of however many. So yeah, Presto's now been running for 2 years. I've got a couple of products here. So this is our 1 kilo. This is our bestseller. I don't know which one I sent you, Christian, but I think it was a ground option. And then another option here is our coffee bags. This is our first 100% recyclable and compostable product. So the packaging here is curbside recyclable, and the product inside, which is like a tea bag but full of coffee, is 100% compostable in your garden, as well as curbside. So just a flavor of what some of our products look like and feel like. So just going to run through here. It's amazing to see the depth that you went in, Nidhi, about the regulations within construction, because within food and drink it's just not there yet. I'm sure it will come, but it's just not there. So kind of Presto's mission, vision, mission, and products. Just looking at some sustainability questions, then getting into the data, working out how our footprint is measured, which Nidhi, you touched on. How does Presto stack up in terms of other brands within our space? The Presto value chain, which I'll get into in a minute. Again, how do we compare on that? And what does it mean for you as a young grad going out into the scary world? So our vision is to be industry leaders for innovation and sustainability. Our mission is to create a coffee that doesn't cost the earth, and our products are expertly crafted and freshly roasted coffee. So Nidhi, you've already touched on this before, but we're at a tipping point within a global sustainability race at the moment. We've already run through the Paris Convention and where we need to be, but so I won't regurgitate that. But yeah, I don't need to touch on the kind of extreme weather that we saw last year, especially forgetting COVID for a second. The Australian wildfires that we saw was an unprecedented event, and the way COVID has kind of owned the news for the last year, it's easy to forget that these events are still happening. So the first thing I just wanted to touch on is this massive misconception around how your carbon footprint is measured. Not sure, Nidhi, if this is the same in the construction industry, but carbon is calculated within food and drink based on the electricity required to produce that certain product. So, for example, we source about 85% of our beans from South America. All of those beans are grown in shade-grown farms, which we're really proud about. And our farmers or chain of farmers, put the beans in the back of their car, drive it to our facility. They then pack it onto boats, ship it over to the UK, and that's when the emissions side of it start to get a bit interesting. So it goes from to our then stored in a warehouse and then sent out to the customer. And so part of that whole value chain, you kind of have multiple points of different calculations. So at the moment in South America, their spread of environmental energy production is far less developed than the UK's. So we produce a certain amount of green energy through different green initiatives, but the common misconception around this is that carbon footprint is just measured on the host country's electricity production, when in actual fact it's split across multiple countries. And in the case of coffee, you have it being produced in Brazil, manufactured in Europe, and then shipped to the UK. So you have multiple different points of electricity consumption. So for us, 1 kilo of coffee produces about 16 and a half, 17 kilos of carbon. which I'll show you in a minute how that stacks up to some of our competitors. So in our first year, which was 2019 to 2020, we sold 34,504 units of coffee. Predominantly that was sold through our website, with Amazon feeding in as a secondary source. Yeah, so 34,202 kilos worth of product was actually moved. Again, this is such a blurred lines of what the company takes responsibility for. Do we take responsibility for shipping our packaging from Eastern Europe, for example, over to the UK? Where does the buck stop on that one? So it's still a little bit murky, those waters. But yeah, 16.2 kilos per kilo of coffee sold, which for our first year was the equivalent of heating 200 homes, 2 million miles in a car, or producing 21 tons of beef. And amazingly, Presto's little business, it contributed to 0.0002% of the UK's annual net emissions. And then this is kind of why I started Presto, and is peering behind the mask of sustainability, and everyone within food and drink is on this rat race to improve their packaging from single use to recyclable or compostable, when in actual fact it only equates to 2% of the total emissions. And using this data to start the business was a complete game changer for us, because we saw that the biggest impact for us is reducing our carbon emissions where the beans are actually produced. So since we've started, we've installed biodigesters at each farm. So all of the waste cherry pips that aren't used in the coffee production go into biodigesters, which produces natural gas to power local houses and communities, and as well as working with the farmers to install solar panels. So the energy, the heavy energy manufacturing done at the farm level of washing the beans and processing the beans, just that little bit of carbon is then saved at that point. And the long-term goals here are to provide farmers with electric vehicles and more infrastructure to reduce their carbon emissions. But it costs money and it costs time. And being a small business, we can only chip away at these things gradually over time. So packaging was the second area that we wanted to focus the business's attention on. So we've now got 100% recyclable packaging across the business, and compostable where we can. There's still some innovation required around compostability within the food and drink. The biggest issue is being the barrier and the hygiene that you just don't get with a compostable bag. There's a couple of competitors that have just started producing compostable Nespresso capsules that go in your coffee machine, and they're absolutely brilliant. You can chuck them out in your garden and they'll go within 6 months. But the amount of packaging required to store them, because they need to be vacuum sealed fresh within coffee especially, kind of outweighs the novelty of being able to throw it in your garden composter right now. But that's changing. Around coffee inbound logistics, Presto only uses electric vehicles, so we partnered with DPD to offer a carbon neutral service, which is pretty standard. All of our processing in the UK is done just outside Peterborough in a tiny little village, and we partnered with these roasters who are the most environmental in the UK. And there's this misconception within coffee of this delicate hand roasted artisanal coffee feeling that customers want. Hand roasting 5 or 6 kilos in a tiny little gas powered roaster is kind of coffee suicide. So we kind of looked at that and thought, well, that's not the best way to do it. So we pivoted and we partnered with this roastery who have a 150 kilo drum that's warmed up via electricity rather than gas, via solar panels on their roof. So for us, traditional roasting is much more power intensive, but we've just decided to go down the eco route. So roasting is 1.2% of our total emissions, and the outward logistics, as I mentioned, or electric vans, just utilizing what DPD have done in the space, which is awesome. And then here comes the big controversy, the big one for us of customer use. So as soon as the bag of coffee arrives at the customer's door, that's when the carbon really starts getting exciting. You know, pouring those coffee beans into a bean to cup machine and putting your kettle on, or pouring it into a cafetiere and then you know, washing it up by using hot water, which causes your boiler to turn on. The whole carbon value chain is biggest within the customer. And for us as a business, we're really struggling at the moment to decide whether we offset the emissions that the business produces, or do we offset the emissions that the customer uses as well. So it's a bit of a controversial point at the moment, and we're going through some customer interviews. But so far, I think there's an expectation within our customers that carbon coverage covers what they do as well, rightly or wrongly. So that's kind of up in the air at the moment. And then around the disposal, so we did launch the brand with packaging that wasn't recyclable. So that did have in our first year anyway, an impact on our carbon value chain. But seeing as we're recyclable now, this 0.2 is more like 0.0001 of our total chain, just because of the benefits of recyclable packaging. So looking at how we compare to some of the brands that you'll see in supermarkets, yeah, coffee is a really bad one, and it's just behind meat, but doesn't get the stigma that beef production gets, rightly or wrongly. Interestingly, Quorn in 2019 started publicizing the amount of carbon on their packets, and advertising regulations soon put a stop to it, because it was more of a naming and shaming exercise for their meat alternatives. So it's something that brands are starting to look at more and more, and I just think it needs to be either adopted wholly as a category or rejected. This one here is our crema espresso, so it's 50% Arabica, 50% Robusta. So this is our worst environmentally, our worst contributor to carbon dioxide. 50% is sourced in Vietnam, and another 50% is sourced in South America. So this one here is our worst contributor, and we're trying to find better ways to reduce those impacts. And then being a small business, how can we kind of shout that we are reducing our impact to the best of our abilities, given our budgets? And I don't know whether anyone's heard of B Corp, but it's a massive corporation with around 4,000 companies associated to it, and we've just submitted our application to be part of that, and that looks at how ethical we are from a sourcing perspective, how we treat our customers, how we treat our employees, how the business is formed, the governance aspect. Is there equality on the board? Do we offer incentivized? Do we offer employees incentives to switch to Bulb, for example, to source their energy at home? And we'll be the first coffee company in Europe to become B Corp certified, because of the kind of upward slope that coffee is currently going through. And then part of this B Corp package is a net zero commitment. They kind of go hand in hand. It is a slippery slope of how you offset your carbon emissions, and we're taking two approaches. One, there's a charity that we've set up with our farmers. Of every bag that we sell, we plant a tree based on the farm where we source our beans from. So this will hopefully mitigate any greenwashing claims that come up from competitors or customers. We can show them the proof that their bag of coffee has contributed to reducing that carbon in the atmosphere, and as well as supporting cities, Trees for Cities, who are partner we've just got onboarded with, just bringing that tree planting element a little bit closer to home, so our customers can actually see the benefits that we bring. And then the third area that isn't actually on here is we've just signed up for 1% for the planet. So being accountable to 1% of our sales being donated to some really awesome charities across the world, and being able to shout about that to our customers just will hopefully move us away from any greenwashing claims. And then, so I guess just kind of summarizing, what does this mean for Presto and the graduates that are going into a really scary world at the moment, governed by sustainability? And it's amazing at how quickly this sustainability piece has changed. When I was at university, it wasn't part of any of our modules, or I didn't have any essays about it or dissertation subjects around sustainability. And I would kind of hope that the university was taking a more sustainable approach to some of their modules, because it's a requirement now. So yeah, managing your reputation, making sure that you're doing all you can do, and just proving that you're not greenwashing. Sorry, and then being sensitive on the B2B side. The amount of stigma that that Oatly got when they onboarded an investor recently who has the majority shareholding in a deforestation company in South America was incredible. So just being delicate on the brands that you work with, especially from a B2B perspective, which is massive for Presto. Internal is so critical, being able to attract the right kind of talent for the business. I found this stat here of 3.7 million young people want a job in the green economy, which is epic. Cost savings, sustainability, unfortunately at the moment, is really expensive. So being